Novel 1. Sir Capiletto cheats a holy friar by a false confession, and dies, and, having lived as a very bad man, is, on his death, reputed a saint, and called Santa Capiletto. A seemly thing it is, dearest ladies, that whatever we do, it be begun in the holy and awful name of him who is the maker of all. Wherefore, as it falls to me to lead the way in this sure enterprise of story-telling, I intend to begin with one of his wondrous works, that, by hearing thereof, our hopes in him, in whom is no change, may be established, and his name be by us forever lauded. 'Tis manifest that, as things temporal were all doomed to pass and perish, so within and without they abound with trouble and anguish and travail, and are subject to infinite perils, nor, save for the especial grace of God, should we, whose being is bound up with and forms part of theirs, have either the strength to endure or the wisdom to combat their adverse influences, by which grace we are visited and penetrated. So we must believe not by reason of any merit of our own, but solely out of the fullness of God's own goodness, and in answer to the prayers of those who, being mortal like ourselves, did faithfully observe his ordinances during their lives, and are now become blessed forever with him in heaven. To whom, as to advocates taught by experience all that belongs to our frailty, we, not daring, perchance, to present our petitions in the presence of so great a judge, make known our requests for such things as we deem expedient for us. And of his mercy richly abounding to usward we have further proof herein, that, no keenness of mortal vision being able in any degree to penetrate the secret counsels of the divine mind, it sometimes, perchance, happens, that, in error of judgment, we make one our advocate before his majesty, who is banished from his presence in eternal exile, and yet he to whom nothing is hidden, having regard rather to the sincerity of our prayers than to our ignorance or the banishment of the intercessor, hears us no less than if the intercessor were in truth one of the blessed who enjoy the light of his countenance, which the story that I am about to relate may serve to make apparent, I mean, according to the standard or the judgment of man, not of God. The story goes, then, that Musciato Francesi, a great and wealthy merchant, being made a knight in France, and being to attend Charles Sansterre, brother of the King of France, when he came into Tuscany at the instance and with the support of Pope Boniface, found his affairs, as often happens to merchants, to be much involved in divers quarters, and neither easily nor suddenly to be adjusted, wherefore he determined to place them in the hands of commissioners, and found no difficulty except as to certain credits given to some Burgundians, for the recovery of which he doubted whether he could come by a competent agent, for well he knew that the Burgundians were violent men and ill-conditioned and faithless, nor could he call to mind any man so bad that he could with confidence oppose his guile to theirs. After long pondering the matter, he recollected one Sir Caprello di Prato, who much frequented his house in Paris, who being short of stature and very affected, the French who knew not the meaning of apparello, but supposed that it meant the same as capello, garland, in their vernacular, called him not capello, but a Capiletto by reason of his diminutive size, and as Capiletto he was known everywhere, whereas few people knew him as Caprello. Now Capiletto's manner of life was thus. He was by profession a notary, and his pride was to make false documents. He would have made them as often as he was asked, and more readily without fee than another at a great price. Few indeed he made that were not false, and great was his shame when they were discovered. False witness he bore, solicited or unsolicited, with boundless delight, and, as oaths were in those days had in very great respect in France, he, scrupling not to forswear himself, corruptly carried the day in every case in which he was summoned faithfully to attest the truth. He took inordinate delight, and bestirred himself with great zeal, in fomenting ill-feeling, enmities, dissensions between friends, kinsfolk and all other folk, and the more calamitous were the consequences the better he was pleased. Set him on murder, or any other foul crime, and he never hesitated, but went about it with alacrity. He had been known on more than one occasion to inflict wounds or death by preference with his own hands. He was a profuse blasphemer of God and his saints, and that on the most trifling occasions, being of all men the most irascible. He was never seen at church, held all the sacraments vile things, and derided them in language of horrible ribaldry. On the other hand, he resorted readily to the tavern and other places of evil repute, and frequented them. He was as fond of women as a dog is of the stick. In the use against nature he had not as match among the most abandoned. He would have pilfered and stolen as a matter of conscience, as a holy man would make in coblation. Most gluttonous he was and inordinately fond of his cups, whereby he sometimes brought upon himself both shame and suffering. He was also a practised gamester and thrower of false dice. But why enlarge so much upon him? Enough that he was, perhaps, the worst man that ever was born. The rank and power of Musiato Francisque had long been this reprobate's mainstay, serving in many instances to secure him considerate treatment on the part of the private persons whom he frequently, and the court which he unremittingly, outraged. So Musiato, having bethought him of this Sir Apparello, with whose way of life he was very well acquainted, judged him to be the very sort of person to cope with the guile of the Burgundians. He therefore sent for him, and thus addressed him: Sir Capoletto, I am, as thou knowest, about to leave this place for good, and among those with whom I have to settle accounts are certain Burgundians, very wily knaves, nor know I the man whom I could more fitly entrust with the recovery of my money than thyself. Wherefore, as thou hast nothing to do at present, if thou wilt undertake this business, I will procure thee the favor of the court, and give thee a reasonable part of what thou shalt recover. Sir Capoletto, being out of employment, and by no means in easy circumstances, and about to lose Musiato, so long his mainstay and support, without the least demur, for in truth he had hardly any choice, made his mind up and answered that he was ready to go. So the bargain was struck. Armed with the power of attorney and the royal letters commendatory, Sir Capoletto took leave of Messer Musiato and hied him to Burgundy, where he was hardly known to a soul. He set about the business which had brought him thither, the recovery of the money, in a manner amicable and considerate, foreign to his nature, as if he were minded to reserve his severity to the last. While thus occupied, he was frequently at the house of two Florentine usurers, who treated him with great distinction out of regard for Messer Musiato, and there it so happened that he fell sick. The two brothers forthwith placed physicians and servants in attendance upon him, and omitted no means meet and apt for the restoration of his health. But all remedies proved unavailing, for being now old, and having led, as the physicians reported, a disorderly life, he went daily from bad to worse like one stricken with a mortal disease. This greatly dishonored the two brothers, and one day, hard by the room in which Sir Capoletto lay sick, they began to talk about him, saying one to the other, "What shall we do with this man? We are hard bested indeed on his account. If we turn him out of the house, sick as he is, we shall not only incur grave censure, but shall evince a signal want of sense, for folk must know the welcome we gave him in the first instance, the solicitude with which we have had him treated and tended since his illness, during which time he could not possibly do aught to displease us, and yet they would see him suddenly turned out of our house sick unto death. On the other hand, he has been so bad a man that he is sure not to confess or receive any of the Church's sacraments, and dying thus unconfessed, he will be denied burial in church, but will be cast out into some ditch like a dog. Nay, 'twill be all one if he do confess, for such and so horrible have been his crimes that no friar or priest either will or can absolve him, and so, dying without absolution, he will still be cast out into the ditch. In which case the folk of these parts, who reprobate our trade as iniquitous and revile it all day long, and would fain rob us, will seize their opportunity, and raise a tumult, and make a raid upon our houses, crying, "Away with these Lombard whom the Church excludes from her pale," and will certainly strip us of our goods, and perhaps take our lives also, so that in any case we stand to lose if this man die. Sir Capoletto, who, as we said, lay close at hand while they thus spoke, and whose hearing was sharpened, as is often the case, by his malady, overheard all that they said about him. So he called them to him, and said to them, I would not have you disquiet yourselves in regard of me, or apprehend loss to befall you by my death. I have heard what you have said of me, and have no doubt that too would be as you say, if matters took the course you anticipate, but I am minded that it shall be otherwise. I have committed so many offenses against God in the course of my life, that one more in the hour of my death will make no difference whatever to the account. So seek out and bring hither the worthiest and most holy friar you can find, and leave me to settle your affairs and mine upon a sound and solid basis, with which you may rest satisfied. The two brothers had not much hope of the result, but yet they went to a friary and asked for a holy and discreet man to hear the confession of a Lombard that was sick in their house, and returned with an aged man of just and holy life, very learned in the Scriptures, and venerable and held in very great and especial reverence by all the citizens. As soon as he had entered the room where Sir Capiletto was lying, and had taken his place by his side, he began gently to comfort him. Then he asked him how long it was since he was confessed. Whereto Sir Capiletto, who had never been confessed, answered, Father, it is my constant practice to be confessed at least once a week, and many a week I am confessed more often. But true it is, that, since I have been sick, now 8 days, I have made no confession, so sore has been my affliction. Son, said the friar, thou hast well done, and well for thee, if so thou continue to do as thou dost confess so often. I see that my labor of hearkening and questioning will be slight. Nay but, Master Friar, said Sir Capiletto, I say not so I have not confessed so often, but that I would fain make a general confession of all my sins that I have committed, so far as I can recall them, from the day of my birth to the present time, and therefore I pray you, my good father, to question me precisely in every particular just as if I had never been confessed, and spare me not by reason of my sickness, for I had far rather do despite to my flesh than, sparing it, risk the perdition of my soul, which my Saviour redeemed with his precious blood. The holy man was mightily delighted with these words, which seemed to him to betoken a soul in a state of grace. He therefore signified to Sir Capiletto his high approval of this practice, and then began by asking him whether he had ever sinned carnally with a woman. Whereto Sir Capiletto answered with a sigh, My father, I scruple to tell you the truth in this matter, fearing lest I sin in vainglory. Nay, but, said the friar, speak boldly. None ever sinned by telling the truth, either in confession or otherwise. Then, said Sir Capiletto, as you bid me speak boldly, I will tell you the truth of this matter. I am virgin even as when I issued from my mother's womb. Now God's blessing on thee, said the friar, well done, and the greater is thy merit in that, hadst thou so willed, thou mightest have done otherwise far more readily than we who are under constraint of rule. He then proceeded to ask, whether he had offended God by gluttony. Whereto Sir Capiletto, heaving a heavy sigh, answered that he had so offended for, being wont to fast not only in Lent like other devout persons, but at least 3 days in every week, taking nothing but bread and water, he had quaffed the water with as good a gusto and as much enjoyment, more particularly when fatigued by devotion or pilgrimage, as great drinkers quaff their wine, and oftentimes he had felt a craving for such dainty dishes of herbs as ladies make when they go into the country, and now and again he had relished his food more than seemed to him meet in one who fasted, as he did, for devotion. Son, said the friar, these sins are natural and very trifling, and therefore I would not have thee burden thy conscience too much with them. There is no man, however holy he may be, but must sometimes find it pleasant to eat after a long fast and to drink after exertion. Oh, my father, said Sir Capiletto, say not this to comfort me. You know well that I know, that the things which are done in the service of God ought to be done in perfect purity of an unsullied spirit, and whoever does otherwise sins. The friar, well content, replied, Glad I am that thou dost think so, and I am mightily pleased with thy pure and good conscience, which therein appears. But tell me, hast thou sinned by avarice, coveting more than was reasonable, or withholding more than was right? My father, replied Sir Cacapoletto, I would not have you disquiet yourself, because I am in the house of these usurers, no part have I in their concerns, nay, I did but come here to admonish and reprehend them, and wean them from this abominable traffic, and so, I believe, I had done, had not God sent me this visitation. But you must know, that my father left me a fortune, of which I dedicated the greater part to God, and since then for my own support and the relief of Christ's poor I have done a little trading, whereof I have desired to make gain, and all that I have gotten I have shared with God's poor, reserving one half for my own needs and giving the other half to them, and so well has my Maker prospered me, that I have ever managed my affairs to better and better account. Well done, said the friar, but how? Hast thou often given way to anger? Often indeed, I assure you, said Sir Cacapoletto. And who could refrain therefrom, seeing men doing forwardly all day long, breaking the commandments of God and recking not of his judgments? Many a time in the course of a single day I had rather be dead than alive, to see the young men going after vanity, swearing and forswearing themselves, haunting taverns, avoiding the churches, and in short walking in the way of the world rather than in God's way. My son, said the friar, this is a righteous wrath, nor could I find occasion therein to lay a penance upon thee. But did anger ever by any chance betray thee into taking human life, or affronting or otherwise wronging any? Alas, replied Sir Cacapoletto, alas, sir, man of God though you seem to me, how come you to speak after this manner? If I had had so much as the least thought of doing any of the things of which you speak, should I believe, think you, that I had been thus supported of God? These are the deeds of robbers and such like evil men, to whom I have ever said, when any I saw, go God change your heart. Said then the friar, now, my son, as thou hopest to be blessed of God, tell me, hast thou never borne false witness against any, or spoken evil of another, or taken the goods of another without his leave? Yes, Master Friar, answered Sir Cacapoletto, most true it is that I have spoken evil of another, for I had once a neighbor who without the least excuse in the world was ever beating his wife, and so great was my pity of the poor creature, whom, when he was in his cups, he would thrash as God alone knows how, that once I spoke evil of him to his wife's kinsfolk. Well, well, said the friar, thou tellest me thou hast been a merchant, hast thou ever cheated any, as merchants used to do? I'faith, yes, Master Friar, said Sir Cacapoletto, but I know not who he was, only that he brought me some money which he owed me for some cloth that I had sold him, and I put it in a box without counting it, where a month afterwards I found 4 farthings more than there should have been, which I kept for a year to return to him, but not seeing him again, I bestowed them in alms for the love of God. This, said the friar, was a small matter, and thou didst well to bestow them as thou didst. The holy friar went on to ask him many other questions, to which he made answer in each case in this sort. Then, as the friar was about to give him absolution, Sir Cacapoletto interposed. Sir, I have yet a sin to confess. What? Asked the friar. I remember, he said, that I once caused my servant to sweep my house on a Saturday afternoon, and that my observance of Sunday was less devout than it should have been. Oh, my son, said the friar, this is a light matter. No, said Sir Cacapoletto, say not a light matter, for Sunday is the more to be had in honor, because on that day our Lord rose from the dead. Then said the holy friar, now is there aught else that thou hast done? Yes, Master Friar, replied Sir Cacapoletto, once by inadvertence I spat in the church of God. At this the friar began to smile, and said, my son, this is not a matter to trouble about. We, who are religious, spit there all day long. And great impiety it is when you so do, replied Sir Cacapoletto, for there is nothing that is so worthy to be kept from all impurity as the holy temple in which sacrifice is offered to God. More he said in the same strain, which I pass over, and then at last he began to sigh, and by to weep bitterly, as he was well able to do when he chose. And the friar demanding, my son, why weepest thou? Alas, Master Friar, answered Sir Cacapoletto, a sin yet remains, which I have never confessed. Such shame were it to me to tell it, and as often as I call it to mind, I weep as you now see me weep, being well assured that God will never forgive me the sin. Then said the holy friar, Come, come, son, what is this that thou say'st? If all the sins of all the men, that ever were or ever shall be, as long as the world shall endure, were concentrated in one man, so great is the goodness of God that he would freely pardon them all, were he but penitent and contrite as I see thou art, and confess them. Wherefore tell me thy sin with a good courage. Then said Sir Capiletto, still weeping bitterly, Alas, my father, mine is too great a sin, and scarce can I believe, if your prayers do not operate, that God will ever grant me his pardon thereof. Tell it with a good courage, said the friar, I promise thee to pray God for thee. Sir Capiletto, however, continued to weep, and would not speak, for all the friar's encouragement. When he had kept him for a good while in suspense, he heaved a mighty sigh, and said, My father, as you promise me to pray God for me, I will tell it you. Know, then, that once, when I was a little child, I cursed my mother, and having so said he began again to weep bitterly. Oh, my son, said the friar, does this seem to thee so great a sin? Men curse God all day long, and he pardons them freely, if they repent them of having so done, and thinkest thou he will not pardon thee this? Weep not, be comforted, for truly, hadst thou been one of them that set him on the cross, with the contrition that I see in thee, thou wouldst not fail of his pardon. Alas! My father, rejoined Sir Capiletto, what is this you say? To curse my sweet mother that carried me in her womb for 9 months day and night, and afterwards on her shoulder more than 100 times. Heinous indeed was my offense, 'tis too great a sin, nor will it be pardoned, unless you pray God for me. The friar, now perceiving that Sir Capiletto had nothing more to say, gave him absolution and his blessing, repeating him for a most holy man, fully believing that all that he had said was true. And who would not have so believed, hearing him so speak at the point of death? Then when all was done, he said, Sir Capiletto, if God so will, you will soon be well, but should it so come to pass that God call your blessed soul to himself in a state of grace, is it well pleasing to you that your body be buried in our convent? Yea, verily, Master Friar, replied Sir Capiletto, there would I be, and nowhere else, since you have promised to pray God for me, besides which I have ever had a special devotion to your order. Wherefore I pray you, that, on your return to your convent, you cause to be sent me that very body of Christ, which you consecrate in the morning on the altar, because unworthy though I be, I purpose with your leave to take it, and afterwards the holy and extreme unction, that, though I have lived as a sinner, I may die at any rate as a Christian. The holy man said that he was greatly delighted, that it was well said of Sir Capiletto, and that he would cause the host to be forthwith brought to him, and so it was. The two brothers, who much misdoubted Sir Capiletto's power to deceive the friar, had taken their stand on the other side of a wooden partition which divided the room in which Sir Capiletto lay from another, and hearkening there they readily heard and understood what Sir Capiletto said to the friar, and at times could scarce refrain their laughter as they followed his confession, and now and again they said one to another, What manner of man is this, whom neither age nor sickness, nor fear of death, on the threshold of which he now stands, nor yet of God, before whose judgment seat he must soon appear, has been able to turn from his wicked ways, that he die not even as he has lived? But seeing that his confession had secured the interment of his body in church, they troubled themselves no further. Sir Capiletto soon afterwards communicated, and growing immensely worse, received the extreme unction, and died shortly after vespers on the same day on which he had made his good confession. So the two brothers, having from his own moneys provided the wherewith to procure him honorable sepulture, and sent word to the friars to come at even to observe the usual vigil, and in the morning to fetch the corpse, set all things in order accordingly. The holy friar who had confessed him, hearing that he was dead, had audience of the prior of the friary. A chapter was convened, and the assembled brothers heard from the confessor's own mouth how Sir Capiletto had been a holy man, as had appeared by his confession, and were exhorted to receive the body with the utmost veneration and pious care, as one by which there was good hope that God would work many miracles. To this the prior and the rest of the credulous confraternity consenting, they went in a body in the evening to the place where the corpse of Sir Capiletto lay, and kept a great and solemn vigil over it, and in the morning they made a procession habited in their surplices and copes with books in their hands and crosses in front, and chanting as they went, they fetched the corpse and brought it back to their church with the utmost pomp and solemnity, being followed by almost all the folk of the city, men and women alike. So it was laid in the church, and then the holy friar who had heard the confession got up in the pulpit and began to preach marvelous things of Sir Capiletto's life, his fasts, his virginity, his simplicity and guilelessness and holiness, narrating among the other matters that of which Sir Capiletto had made tearful confession as his greatest sin, and how he had hardly been able to make him conceive that God would pardon him, from which he took occasion to reprove his hearers, saying, "And you, cursed of God, on the least pretext, blaspheme God and his mother, and all the celestial court." And much beside he told of his loyalty and purity, and, in short, so wrought upon the people by his words, to which they gave entire credence, that they all conceived a great veneration for Sir Capiletto, and at the close of the office came pressing forward with the utmost vehemence to kiss the feet and the hands of the corpse, from which they tore off the airments, each thinking himself blessed to have but a scrap thereof in his possession, and so it was arranged that it should be kept there all day long, so as to be visible and accessible to all. At nightfall it was honorably interred in a marble tomb in one of the chapels, where on the morrow, one by one, folk came and lit tapers and prayed and paid their vows, setting there the waxen images which they had dedicated. And the fame of Capiletto's holiness and the devotion to him grew in such measure that scarce any there was that in any adversity would vow aught to any saint but he, and they called him and still call him Santo Capiletto, affirming that many miracles have been and daily are wrought by God through him for such as devoutly crave his intercession. So lived, so died Sir Apollo da Prato, and came to be reputed a saint, as you have heard. Nor would I deny that it is possible that he is of the number of the blessed in the presence of God, seeing that, though his life was evil and depraved, yet he might in his last moments have made so complete an act of contrition that perchance God had mercy on him and received him into his kingdom. But, as this is hidden from us, I speak according to that which appears, and I say that he ought rather to be in the hands of the devil in hell than in paradise, which, if so it be, is a manifest token of the superabundance of the goodness of God to usward, inasmuch as he regards not our error but the sincerity of our faith, and hearkens unto us when, mistaking one who is at enmity with him for a friend, we have recourse to him, as to one holy indeed, as our intercessor for his grace. Wherefore, that we of this gay company may by his grace be preserved safe and sound throughout this time of adversity, commend we ourselves in our need to him, whose name we began by invoking, with lauds and reverent devotion and good confidence that we shall be heard. And so he was silent. Novel 2. Abraham, a Jew, at the instance of Jehanot de Hevigny, goes to the court of Rome, and having marked the evil life of the clergy, returns to Paris, and becomes a Christian. Pamphilos's story elicited the mirth of some of the ladies and the hearty commendation of all, who listened to it with close attention until the end. Whereupon the queen bade Nephile, who sat next her, to tell a story, that the commencement thus made of their diversions might have its sequel. Nephile, whose graces of mind matched the beauty of her person, consented with a gladsome goodwill, and thus began. Pamphilo has shewn by his story that the goodness of God spares to regard our errors when they result from unavoidable ignorance, and in mine I mean to shew you how the same goodness, bearing patiently with the shortcomings of those who should be its faithful witness in deed and word, draws from them contrariwise evidence of his infallible truth, to the end that what we believe we may with more assured conviction follow. In Paris, gracious ladies, as I have heard tell, there was once a great merchant, a large dealer in drapery, a good man, most loyal and righteous, his name Jehanot de Hevigny, between whom and a Jew, Abraham by name, also a merchant, and a man of great wealth, as also most loyal and righteous, there subsisted a very close friendship. Now Chenot, observing Abraham's loyalty and rectitude, began to be sorely vexed in spirit that the soul of one so worthy and wise and good should perish for want of faith. Wherefore he began in a friendly manner to plead with him, that he should leave the errors of the Jewish faith and turn to the Christian verity, which, being sound and holy, he might see daily prospering and gaining ground, whereas, on the contrary, his own religion was dwindling and was almost come to nothing. The Jew replied that he believed that there was no faith sound and holy except the Jewish faith, in which he was born, and in which he meant to live and die, nor would anything ever turn him therefrom. Nothing daunted, however, Chenot some days afterwards began again to ply Abraham with similar arguments, explaining to him in such crude fashion as merchants use the reasons why our faith is better than the Jewish. And though the Jew was a great master in the Jewish law, yet, whether it was by reason of his friendship for Chenot, or that the Holy Spirit dictated the words that the simple merchant used, at any rate the Jew began to be much interested in Chenot's arguments, though still too staunch in his faith to suffer himself to be converted. But Chenot was no less assiduous in plying him with argument than he was obstinate in adhering to his law, insomuch that at length the Jew, overcome by such incessant appeals, said, Well, Chenot, thou wouldst have me become a Christian, and I am disposed to do so, provided I first go to Rome and there see him whom thou callest God's vicar on earth, and observe what manner of life he leads and his brother cardinals with him, and if such it be that thereby, in conjunction with thy words, I may understand that thy faith is better than mine, as thou hast sought to shew me, I will do as I have said, otherwise I will remain as I am a Jew. When Chenot heard this, he was greatly distressed, saying to himself, I thought to have converted him, but now I see that the pains which I took for so excellent a purpose are all in vain, for, if he goes to the court of Rome and sees the iniquitous and foul life which the clergy led there, so far from turning Christian, had he been converted already, he would without doubt relapse into Judaism. Then turning to Abraham he said, Nay, but, my friend, why wouldst thou be at all this labor and great expense of traveling from here to Rome? To say nothing of the risks both by sea and by land which a rich man like thee must needs run. Thinkest thou not, to find here one that can give thee baptism? And as for any doubts that thou mayst have touching the faith to which I point thee, or wilt thou find greater masters and sages therein than here, to resolve thee of any question thou mayst put to them? Wherefore in my opinion this journey of thine is superfluous. Think that the prelates there are such as thou mayst have seen here, nay, as much better as they are nearer to the chief pastor. And so, by my advice thou wilt spare thy pains until some time of indulgence, when I, perhaps, may be able to bear thee company. The Jew replied, Chenot, I doubt not that so it is as thou sayest, but once and for all I tell thee that I am minded to go there, and will never otherwise do that which thou wouldst have me and hast so earnestly besought me to do. Go then, said Chenot, seeing that his mind was made up, and good luck go with thee. And so he gave up the contest because nothing would be lost, though he felt sure that he would never become a Christian after seeing the court of Rome. The Jew took horse, and posted with all possible speed to Rome, where on his arrival he was honorably received by his fellow Jews. He said nothing to anyone of the purpose for which he had come, but began earnestly to acquaint himself with the ways of the Pope and the cardinals and the other prelates and all the courtiers, and from what he saw for himself, being a man of great intelligence, or learned from others, he discovered that without distinction of rank they were all sunk in the most disgraceful lewdness, sinning not only in the way of nature but after the manner of the men of Sodom, without any restraint of remorse or shame, in such sort that, when any great favor was to be procured, the influence of the courtesans and boys was of no small moment. Moreover he found them one and all gluttonous, wine-bibbers, drunkards, and next after lewdness, most addicted to the shameless service of the belly, like brute beasts. And, as he probed the matter still further, he perceived that they were also greedy and avaricious. The human, nay Christian blood, and things sacred of what kind soever, spiritualities no less than temporalities, they bought and sold for money, which traffic was greater and employed more brokers than the drapery trade and all the other trades of Paris put together. Open simony and gluttonous excess being glozed under such specious terms as arrangement and moderate use of creature comforts, as if God could not penetrate the thoughts of even the most corrupt hearts, to say nothing of the signification of words, and would suffer himself to be misled after the manner of men by the names of things, which matters, with many others which are not to be mentioned. Our modest and sober-minded Jew found by no means to his liking, so that, his curiosity being fully satisfied, he was minded to return to Paris, which accordingly he did. There, on his arrival, he was met by Jehoshaphat, and the two made great cheer together. Jehoshaphat expected Abraham's conversion least of all things, and allowed him some days of rest before he asked what he thought of the Holy Father and the cardinals and the other courtiers. To which the Jew forthwith replied, I think God owes them all an evil recompense. I tell thee, so far as I was able to carry my investigations, holiness, devotion, good works or exemplary living in any kind was nowhere to be found in any clerk, but only lewdness, avarice, gluttony, and the like, and worse, if worse may be, appear to be held in such honor of all, that to my thinking the place is a center of diabolical rather than of divine activities. To the best of my judgment, your pastor, and by consequence all that are about him, devote all their zeal and ingenuity and subtlety to devise how best and most speedily they may bring the Christian religion to naught and banish it from the world. And because I see that what they so zealously endeavor does not come to pass, but that on the contrary your religion continually grows, and shines more and more clear, therein I seem to discern a very evident token that it, rather than any other, as being more true and holy than any other, has the Holy Spirit for its foundation and support. For which cause, whereas I met your exhortations in a harsh and obdurate temper, and would not become a Christian, now I frankly tell you that I would on no account omit to become such. Go we then to the church, and there according to the traditional rite of your holy faith let me receive baptism. Jehoshaphat, who had anticipated a diametrically opposite conclusion, as soon as he heard him so speak, was the best pleased man that ever was in the world. So taking Abraham with him to Notre Dame, he prayed the clergy there to baptize him. When they heard that it was his own wish, they forthwith did so, and Jehoshaphat raised him from the sacred font, and named him Jean, and afterwards he caused teachers of great eminence thoroughly to instruct him in our faith, which he readily learned, and afterwards practiced in a good, a virtuous, nay, a holy life. Novel 3. Melchizedek, a Jew, by a story of 3 rings averts a great danger with which he was menaced by Saladin. When Nephile had brought her story to a close amid the commendations of all the company, Philomena, at the queen's behest, thus began. The story told by Nephile brings to my mind another in which also Jew appears, but this time as the hero of a perilous adventure, and as enough has been said of God and of the truth our faith, it will not now be inopportune if we descend to mundane events and the actions of men. Wherefore I propose to tell you a story, which will perhaps dispose you to be more circumspect than you have been wont to be in answering questions addressed to you. Well you know, or should know, loving gossips, that, as it often happens that folk by their own folly forfeit a happy estate and are plunged in most grievous misery, so good sense will extricate the wise from extremity of peril, and establish them in complete and assured peace. Of the change from good to evil fortune, which folly may effect, instances abound indeed, occurring as they do by the thousand day by day. They are so conspicuous that their recital would be beside our present purpose. But that good sense may be our score in misfortune, I will now, as I promised, make plain to you within the narrow compass of a little story. Saladin, who by his great valor had from small beginnings made himself Sultan of Egypt, and gained many victories over kings both Christian and Saracen, having in divers wars and by divers lavish displays of magnificence spent all his treasure, and in order to meet a certain emergency being in need of a large sum of money, and being at a loss to raise it with a celerity adequate to his necessity, bethought him of a wealthy Jew, Melchizedek by name, who learned adjacence in Alexandria, and who, were he but willing, was, as he believed, able to accommodate him, but was so miserly that he would never do so of his own accord, nor was Saladin disposed to constrain him thereto. So great, however, was his necessity that, after pondering every method whereby the Jew might be induced to be compliant, at last he determined to devise a tolerably reasonable pretext for extorting the money from him. So he sent for him, received him affably, seated him by his side, and presently said to him, "My good man, I have heard from many people that thou art very wise, and of great discernment in divine things, wherefore I would gladly know of thee, which of the three laws thou reputest the true law, the law of the Jews, the law of the Saracens, or the law of the Christians?" The Jew, who was indeed a wise man, saw plainly enough that Saladin meant to entangle him in his speech, that he might have occasion to harass him, and bethought him that he could not praise any of the three laws above another without furnishing Saladin with the pretext which he sought. So, concentrating all the force of his mind to shape such an answer as might avoid the snare, he presently lit on what he sought, saying, "My lord, a pretty question indeed is this which you propound, and fain would I answer it, to which end it is apposite that I tell you a story, which, if you will hearken, is as follows. If I mistake not, I remember to have often heard tell of a great and rich man of old time, who among other most precious jewels had in his treasury a ring of extraordinary beauty and value, which by reason of its value and beauty he was minded to leave to his heirs forever, for which cause he ordained, that, whichever of his sons was found in possession of the ring as by his bequest, should thereby be designate his heir, and be entitled to receive from the rest the honor and homage due to a superior. The son, to whom he bequeathed the ring, left it in like manner to his descendants, making the like ordinance as his predecessor. In short, the ring passed from hand to hand for many generations, and in the end came to the hands of one who had 3 sons, goodly and virtuous all, and very obedient to their father, so that he loved them all indifferently. The rule touching the descent of the ring was known to the young men, and each aspiring to hold the place of honor among them did all he could to persuade his father, who was now old, to leave the ring to him at his death. The worthy man, who loved them all equally, and knew not how to choose from among them a sole legatee, promised the ring to each in turn, and in order to satisfy all 3, caused a cunning artificer secretly to make 2 other rings, so like the first, that the maker himself could hardly tell which was the true ring. So, before he died, he disposed of the rings, giving one privily to each of his sons, whereby it came to pass, that after his decease each of the sons claimed the inheritance and the place of honor, and, his claim being disputed by his brothers, produced his ring in witness of right. And the rings being found so like one to another that it was impossible to distinguish the true one, the suit to determine the true heir remained pendent, and still so remains. And so, my lord, to your question, touching the 3 laws given to the 3 peoples by God the Father, I answer, each of these peoples deems itself to have the true inheritance, the true law, the true commandments of God, but which of them is justified in so believing, is a question which, like that of the rings, remains pendent. The excellent adroitness with which the Jew had contrived to evade the snare which he had laid for his feet was not lost upon Saladin. He therefore determined to let the Jew know his need, and did so, telling him at the same time what he had intended to do, in the event of his answering less circumspectly than he had done. Thereupon the Jew gave the Sultan all the accommodation that he required, which the Sultan afterwards repaid him in full. He also gave him most munificent gifts with his lifelong amity, and a great and honorable position near his person. Novel 4. A monk lapses into a sin meriting the most severe punishment, justly insures the same fault in his abbot, and thus evades the penalty. The silence which followed the conclusion of Philomena's tale was broken by Daniel, who sat next her, and without waiting for the queen's word, for he knew that by the rule laid down at the commencement it was now his turn to speak, began on this wise: Loving ladies, if I have well understood the intention of you all, we are here to afford entertainment to one another by storytelling, wherefore, provided only naught is done that is repugnant to this end, I deem it lawful for each, and so said our Queen a little while ago, to tell whatever story seems to him most likely to be amusing. Seeing, then, that we have heard how Abraham saved his soul by the good counsel of Johanna de Havigny, and Melchizedek by his own good sense safeguarded his wealth against the stratagems of Saladin, I hope to escape your censure in narrating a brief story of a monk, who by his address delivered his body from imminent peril of most severe chastisement. In the not very remote district of Lunigiana there flourished formerly a community of monks more numerous and holy than is there to be found today, among whom was a young brother, whose vigor and lusty could neither the fasts nor the vigils avail to subdue. One afternoon, while the rest of the confraternity slept, our young monk took a stroll around the church, which lay in a very sequestered spot, and chanced to espy a young and very beautiful girl, a daughter, perhaps, of one of the hisbandmen of those parts, going through the fields and gathering herbs as she went. No sooner had he seen her than he was sharply assailed by carnal concupiscence, insomuch that he made up to and accosted her, and she hearkening, little by little they came to an understanding, and uncobserved by any entered his cell together. Now it so chanced that, while they fooled it within somewhat recklessly, he being overwrought with passion, the abbot awoke, and passing slowly by the young monk's cell, heard the noise which they made within, and the better to distinguish the voices, came softly up to the door of the cell, and listening discovered that beyond all doubt there was a woman within. His first thought was to force the door open, but, changing his mind, he returned to his chamber and waited until the monk should come out. Delightsome beyond measure though the monk found his intercourse with the girl, yet was he not altogether without anxiety. He had heard, as he thought, the sound of footsteps in the dormitory, and having applied his eye to a convenient aperture had had a good view of the abbot as he stood by the door listening. He was thus fully aware that the abbot might have detected the presence of a woman in the cell, whereat he was exceedingly distressed, knowing that he had a severe punishment to expect, but he concealed his vexation from the girl while he busily cast about in his mind for some way of escape from his embarrassment. He thus hit on a novel stratagem which was exactly suited to his purpose. With the air of one who had had enough of the girl's company, he said to her, "I shall now leave you in order that I may arrange for your departure hence uncobserved. Stay here quietly until I return." So out he went, locking the door of the cell, and withdrawing the key, which he carried straight to the abbot's chamber and handed to him, as was the custom when a monk was going out, saying with a composed air, "Sir, I was not able this morning to bring in all the faggots which I had made ready, so with your leave I will go to the wood and bring them in." The abbot, desiring to have better cognizance of the monk's offense, and not dreaming that the monk knew that he had been detected, was pleased with the turn matters had taken, and received the key gladly, at the same time giving the monk the desired leave. So the monk withdrew, and the abbot began to consider what course it were best for him to take, whether to assemble the brotherhood and open the door in their presence, that, being witnesses of the delinquency, they might have no cause to murmur against him when he proceeded to punish the delinquent, or whether it were not better first to learn from the girl's own lips how it had come about, and reflecting that she might be the wife or daughter of some man who would take it ill that she should be shamed by being exposed to the gaze of all the monks, he determined first of all to find out who she was, and then to make up his mind. So he went softly to the cell, opened the door, and, having entered, closed it behind him. The girl, seeing that her visitor was none other than the abbot, quite lost her presence of mind, and quaking with shame began to weep. Master Abbot surveyed her from head to foot, and seeing that she was fresh and comely, fell a prey, although he was, to fleshly cravings no less poignant and sudden than those which the young monk had experienced, and began thus to commune with himself, "Alas! Why take I not my pleasure when I may, seeing that I never need lack for occasions of trouble and vexation of spirit? Here is a fair wench, and no one in the world to know. If I can bring her to pleasure me, I know not why I should not do so. Who will know? No one will ever know, and sin that is hidden is half forgiven. This chance may never come again, so, methinks, it were the part of wisdom to take the boon which God bestows. So musing, with an altogether different purpose from that with which he had come, he drew near the girl, and softly bade her to be comforted, and besought her not to weep, and so little by little he came at last to show her what he would be at. The girl, being made neither of iron nor of adamant, was readily induced to gratify the abbot, who after bestowing upon her many an embrace and kiss, got upon the monk's bed, where, being sensible, perhaps, of the disparity between his reverend portliness and her tender youth, and fearing to injure her by his excessive weight, he refrained from lying upon her, but laid her upon him, and in that manner disported himself with her for a long time. The monk, who had only pretended to go to the wood, and had concealed himself in the dormitory, no sooner saw the abbot enter his cell than he was overjoyed to think that his plan would succeed, and when he saw that he had locked the door, he was well assured thereof. So he stole out of his hiding place, and set his eye to an aperture through which he saw and heard all that the abbot did and said. At length the abbot, having had enough of dalliance with the girl, locked her in the cell and returned to his chamber. Catching sight of the monk soon afterwards, and supposing him to have returned from the wood, he determined to give him a sharp reprimand and have him imprisoned, that he might thus secure the prey for himself alone. He therefore caused him to be summoned, hit him very severely and with a stern countenance, and ordered him to be put in prison. The monk replied trippingly, Sir, I have not been so long in the order of Saint Benedict as to have every particular of the rule by heart, nor did you teach me before today in what posture it behoves the monk to have intercourse with women, but limited your instruction to such matters as fasts and vigils. As, however, you have now given me my lesson, I promise you, if you also pardon my offense, that I will never repeat it, but will always follow the example which you have set me. The abbot, who was a shrewd man, saw at once that the monk was not only more knowing than he, but had actually seen what he had done, nor, conscience-stricken himself, could he for shame mete out to the monk a measure which he himself merited. So pardon given, with an injunction to bury what had been seen in silence, they decently conveyed the young girl out of the monastery, whither, it is to be believed, they now and again caused her to return. Novel 5. The Marchioness of Monferrato by a banquet of hens seasoned with wood checks the mad passion of the King of France. The story told by Davenant evoked at first some qualms of shame in the minds of the ladies, as was apparent by the modest blush that tinged their faces. Then exchanging glances, and scarce able to refrain their mirth, they listened to it with half-suppressed smiles. On its conclusion they bestowed upon Davenant a few words of gentle reprehension with intent to admonish him that such stories were not to be told among ladies. The queen then turned to Ficametta, who was seated on the grass at her side, and bade her follow suit, and Ficametta with a gay and gracious mien thus began the line upon which our storytelling proceeds, to wit, to shew the virtue that resides in apt and ready repartees, pleases me well, and as in affairs of love men and women or in diverse case, for to aspire to the love of a woman of higher lineage than his own is wisdom in man, whereas a woman's good sense is then most conspicuous when she knows how to preserve herself from becoming enamored of a man, her superior in rank. I am minded, fair my ladies, to shew you by the story which I am now to tell, how by deed and word a gentlewoman both defended herself against attack, and weaned her suitor from his love. The Marquis of Monferrato, a paladin of distinguished prowess, was gone overseas as gonfalonier of the church in a general array of the Christian forces, whose merits being canvassed at the court of Philippe le Bourguin, on the eve of his departure from France on the same service, a knight observed, that there was not under the stars a couple comparable to the Marquis and his lady in that, while the Marquis was a paragon of the knightly virtues, his lady for beauty and honor was without a peer among all the other ladies of the world. These words made so deep an impression on the mind of the King of France that, Though he had never seen the lady, he fell ardently in love with her, and, being to join the Armada, resolved that his port of embarkation should be no other than Genoa, in order that, travelling thither by land, he might find a decent pretext for visiting the Marchioness, with whom in the absence of the Marquis he trusted to have the success which he desired, nor did he fail to put his design in execution. Having sent his main army on before, he took the road himself with a small company of gentlemen, and, as they approached the territory of the Marquis, he dispatched a courier to the Marchioness, a day in advance, to let her know that he expected to breakfast with her the next morning. The lady, who knew her part and played it well, replied graciously, that he would be indeed welcome, and that his presence would be the greatest of all favors. She then began to commune with herself, what this might import, that so great a king should come to visit her in her husband's absence, nor was she so deluded as not to surmise that it was the fame of her beauty that drew him thither. Nevertheless she made ready to do him honor in a manner befitting her high degree, summoning to her presence such of the retainers as remained in the castle, and giving all needful directions with their advice, except that the order of the banquet and the choice of the dishes she reserved entirely to herself. Then, having caused all the hens that could be found in the countryside to be brought with all speed into the castle, she bade her cooks furnish forth the royal table with divers dishes made exclusively of such fare. The king arrived on the appointed day, and was received by the lady with great and ceremonious cheer. Fair and noble and gracious seemed she in the eyes of the king beyond all that he had conceived from the knight's words, so that he was lost in admiration and inly extolled her to the skies, his passion being the more inflamed in proportion as he found the lady surpass the idea which he had formed of her. A suite of rooms furnished with all the appointments befitting the reception of so great a king was placed at his disposal, and after a little rest, breakfast time being come, he and the Marchioness took their places at the same table, while the suite were honorably entertained at other boards according to their several qualities. Many courses were served with no lack of excellent and rare wines, whereby the king was mightily pleased, as also by the extraordinary beauty of the Marchioness, on whom his eye from time to time rested. However, as course followed course, the king observed with some surprise, that, though the dishes were diverse, yet they were all but variations of one and the same fare, to wit, the pullet. Besides which he knew that the domain was one which could not but afford plenty of divers sorts of game, and by forewarning the lady of his approach, he had allowed time for hunting yet. For all his surprise, he would not broach the question more directly with her than by a reference to her hens, so, turning to her with a smile, he said, "Madam, do hens grow in this country without so much as a single cock?" The Marchioness, who perfectly apprehended the drift of the question, saw in it an opportunity, sent her by God, of divining her virtuous resolution, so casting a haughty glance upon the king she answered thus, "Sire, no, but the women, though they may differ somewhat from others in dress and rank, or yet of the same nature here as elsewhere." The significance of the banquet of pullets was made manifest to the king by these words, as also the virtue which they veiled. He perceived that on a lady of such a temper words would be wasted, and that force was out of the question. Wherefore, yielding to the dictates of prudence and honor, he was now as prompt to quench, as he had been inconsiderate in conceiving, his unfortunate passion for the lady, and fearing her answers, he refrained from further jesting with her, and dismissing his hopes devoted himself to his breakfast, which done, he disarmed suspicion of the dishonorable purpose of his visit by an early departure, and thanking her for the honor she had conferred upon him, and commending her to God, took the road to Genoa. Novel 6. A worthy man by an apt saying puts to shame the wicked hypocrisy of the religious. When all had commended the virtue of the Marchioness and the spirited reproof which she administered to the King of France, Amelia, who sate next to Fichimeta, obeyed the Queen's behest, and with a good courage thus began, "My story is also of a reproof, but of one administered by a worthy man, who lived the secular life, to a greedy religious, by a gibe as merry as admirable. Know then, dear ladies, that there was in our city, not long ago, a friar minor, an inquisitor in matters of heresy, who, albeit he strove might and main to pass himself off as a holy man and tenderly solicitous for the integrity of the Christian faith, as they all do, yet he had as keen a scent for a full purse as for a deficiency of faith. Now it so chanced that his zeal was rewarded by the discovery of a good man far better furnished with money than with sense, who in an unguarded moment, not from defect of faith, but rather, perhaps from excess of hilarity, being heated with wine, had happened to say to his boon companions, that he had a wine good enough for Christ himself to drink, which being reported to the inquisitor, he, knowing the man to be possessed of large estates and a well-lined purse, set to work in hot haste, cum gladius et fustibus, to bring all the rigor of the law to bear upon him, designing thereby not to lighten the load of his victim's misbelief, but to increase the weight of his own purse by the florins, which he might, as he did, receive from him. So he cited him to his presence, and asked him whether what was alleged against him were true. The good man answered in the affirmative, and told him how it had happened. Then said our most holy and devout inquisitor of St. John Goldenbeard, "One then hast thou made Christ a wine-bibber, and a lover of rare vintages, as if he were a sot, a toper and a tavern haunter even as one of you. And thinkest thou now by a few words of apology to pass this off as a light matter? It is no such thing as thou supposest. Thou hast deserved the fire, and we should but do our duty, did we inflict it upon thee." With these and the like words in plenty he upbraided him, bending on him meanwhile a countenance as stern as if Epicurus had stood before him denying the immortality of the soul. In short, he so terrified him that the good man was fain to employ certain intermediaries to anoint his palms with a liberal allowance of St. John Goldenmouth's grease, an excellent remedy for the disease of avarice which spreads like a pestilence among the clergy, and notably among the friars minors, who dare not touch a coin, that he might deal gently with him. And great being the virtue of this ointment, albeit no mention is made thereof by Galen in any part of his medicines, it had so gracious an effect that the threatened fire gave place to a cross, which he was to wear as if he were bound for the emprise overseas, and to make the ensign more handsome the inquisitor ordered that it should be yellow upon a black ground. Besides which, after pocketing the coin, he kept him dangling about him for some days, bidding him by way of penance hear mass every morning at Santa Croce, and afterwards wait upon him at the breakfast-hour, after which he was free to do as he pleased for the rest of the day. All which he most carefully observed, and so it fell out that one of these mornings there were chanted at the Mass, at which he assisted, the following words of the Gospel: "You shall receive an hundredfold and shall possess eternal life." With these words deeply graven in his memory, he presented himself, as he was bidden, before the inquisitor, where he sate taking his breakfast, and being asked whether he had heard Mass that morning, he promptly answered, "Yes, sir." And being further asked, "Heardest thou aught therein, as to which thou art in doubt, or hast thou any question to propound?" The good man responded, "Nay, indeed, doubt have I none of aught that I heard, but rather assured faith in the verity of all. One thing, however, I heard, which caused me to commiserate you and the rest of you friars very heartily, in regard of the evil plight in which you must find yourselves in the other world." "And what," said the inquisitor, "was the passage that so moved thee to commiserate us?" "Sir," rejoined the good man, "it was that passage in the Gospel which says, 'You shall receive an hundredfold.'" "You heard aright," said the inquisitor, "but why did the passage so affect you?" "Sir," replied the good man, "I will tell you. Since I have been in attendance here, I have seen a crowd of poor folk receive a daily dole, now of 1, now of 2, huge tureens of swill, being the refuse from your table, and that of the brothers of this convent, whereof if you are to receive an hundredfold in the other world, you will have so much that it will go hard, but you are all drowned therein." This raised a general laugh among those who sat at the inquisitor's table, whereat the inquisitor, feeling that their gluttony and hypocrisy had received a home thrust, was very rough, and, but that what he had already done had not escaped censure, would have instituted fresh proceedings against him in revenge for the pleasantry with which he had rebuked the baseness of himself and his brother friars. So in impotent wrath he bade him go about his business and shew himself there no more. 1. The Fiorino d'Oro bore the effigy of St. John. Novel 7. Bergamino, with a story of Promaso and the abbot of Cluny, finally ensures a sudden access of avarice in Messer King della Scala. Emilia's charming manner and her story drew laughter and commendation from the queen and all the company, who were much tickled by her new type of crusader. When the laughter had subsided, and all were again silent, Philostrato, on whom the narration now fell, began on this wise: A fine thing it is, noble ladies, to hit a fixed mark, but if, on the sudden appearance of some strange object, it be forthwith hit by the bowman, 'tis little short of a miracle. The corrupt and filthy life of the clergy offers on many sides a fixed mark of iniquity at which, whoever is so minded, may let fly, with little doubt that they will reach it, the winged words of reproof and reprehension. Wherefore, though the worthy man did well to censure in the person of the inquisitor the pretended charity of the friars who give to the poor what they ought rather to give to the pigs or throw away, higher indeed is the praise which I accord to him, of whom, taking my cue from the last story, I mean to speak, seeing that by a clever apologus he rebuked a sudden and unwonted access of avarice in Messer King della Scala, conveying in a figure what he had at heart to say touching Messer Cain and himself, which apologus is to follow. Far and wide, almost to the ends of the earth, is born the most illustrious renown of Messer King della Scala, in many ways the favored child of fortune, a lord almost without a peer among the notables and magnifios of Italy since the time of the Emperor Frederick II. Now Messer Cain, being minded to hold high festival at Verona, whereof fame should speak marvelous things, and many folk from divers parts, of whom the greater number were jesters of every order, being already arrived, Messer Cain did suddenly for some cause or another abandon his design, and dismiss them with a partial recompense. One only, Bergamino by name, a speaker ready and polished in a degree credible only to such as heard him, remained, having received no recompense or conge, still cherishing the hope that this omission might yet turn out to his advantage. But Messer Cain was possessed with the idea that whatever he might give Bergamino would be far more completely thrown away than if he had tossed it into the fire, so never a word of the sort said he or sent he to him. A few days thus passed, and then Bergamino, seeing that he was in no demand or request for aught that belonged to his office, and being also at heavy charges at his end for the keep of his horses and servants, fell into a sort of melancholy, but still he waited a while, not deeming it expedient to leave. He had brought with him 3 rich and goodly robes, given him by other lords, that he might make a brave show at the festival. And when his host began to press for payment he gave him one of the robes afterwards. There being still much outstanding against him, he must needs, if he would tarry longer at the inn, give the host the 2nd robe, after which he began to live on the 3rd, being minded remain there, as long as it would hold out, in expectation of better luck, and then to take his departure. Now, while he was thus living on the 3rd robe, it chanced that Messer Cain encountered him one day as he sate at breakfast with a very melancholy visage, which Messer Cain observing, said, rather to tease him than expecting to elicit from him any pleasant retort, What ails thee, Bergamino, that thou art still so melancholy? Let me know the reason why. Whereupon Bergamino, without a moment's reflection, told the following story, which could not have fitted his own case more exactly if it had been long premeditated. My lord, you must know that Promaso was a grammarian of great eminence, and excellent and quick beyond all others in versifying, whereby he waxed so notable and famous that, albeit he was not everywhere known by sight, yet there were scarce any that did not at least by name and report know who Promaso was. Now it so happened that, being once at Paris in strident circumstances, as it was his lot to be most of his time by reason that virtue is little appreciated by the powerful, he heard speak of the abbot of Cluny, who, except the Pope, is supposed to be the richest prelate, in regard of his vast revenues, that the Church of God can shew, and marvelous and magnificent things were told him of the perpetual court which the abbot kept, and how, wherever he was, he denied not to any that came there either meat or drink, so only that he preferred his request while the abbot was at table. Which when Primaso heard, he determined to go and see for himself what magnificent state this abbot kept, for he was one that took great delight in observing the ways of powerful and lordly men. Wherefore he asked how far from Paris was the abbot then sojourning. He was informed that the abbot was then at one of his places distant perhaps 6 miles, which Primaso concluded he could reach in time for breakfast, if he started early in the morning. When he had learned the way, he found that no one else was traveling by it, and fearing lest by mischance he should lose it, and so find himself where it would not be easy for him to get food, he determined to obviate so disagreeable a contingency by taking with him 3 loaves of bread, as for drink. Water, though not much to his taste, was, he supposed, to be found everywhere. So, having disposed the loaves in the fold of his tunic, he took the road and made such progress that he reached the abbot's place of sojourn before the breakfast hour. Having entered, he made the circuit of the entire place, observing everything, the vast array of tables, and the vast kitchen well appointed with all things needful for the preparation and service of the breakfast, and saying to himself, in very truth this man is even such a magnifico as he is reported to be. While his attention was thus occupied, the abbot's seneschal, it being now breakfast time, gave order to serve water for the hands, which being washen, they sat them all down to breakfast. Now it so happened that Primaso was placed immediately in front of the door by which the abbot must pass from his chamber into the hall, in which, according to rule of his court, neither wine, nor bread, nor aught else drinkable or eatable was ever set on the tables before he made his appearance and was seated. The seneschal, therefore, having set the tables, sent word to the abbot that all was now ready, and they waited only his pleasure. So the abbot gave the word, the door of his chamber was thrown open, and he took a step or 2 forward towards the hall, gazing straight in front of him as he went. Thus it fell out that the first man on whom he set eyes was Primaso, who was in very sorry trim. The abbot, who knew him not by sight, no sooner saw him, than, surprised by a churlish mood to which he had hitherto been an entire stranger, he said to himself, so it is to such as this man that I give my hospitality. And going back into the chamber he bade lock the door, and asked of his attendants whether the vile fellow that sate at table directly opposite the door was known to any of them, who, one and all, answered in the negative. Primaso waited a little, but he was not used to fast, and his journey had whetted his appetite. So, as the abbot did not return, he drew out one of the loaves which he had brought with him, and began to eat. The abbot, after a while, bade one of his servants go see whether Primaso were gone. The servant returned with the answer, no, sir, and what is more he is eating a loaf of bread, which he seems to have brought with him. Be it so then, said the abbot, who was vexed that he was not gone of his own accord, but was not disposed to turn him out. Let him eat his own bread, if he have any, for he shall have none of ours today. By and by Primaso, having finished his first loaf, began, as the abbot did not make his appearance, to eat the second, which was likewise reported to the abbot, who had again sent to see if he were gone. Finally, as the abbot still delayed his coming, Primaso, having finished the second loaf, began upon the third, whereof, once more, word was carried to the abbot, who now began to commune with himself and say, alas, my soul, what unwonted mood harborest thou today? What avarice? What scorn? And of whom? I have given my hospitality, now for many a year, to whoso craved it, without looking to see whether he were gentle or hurl, poor or rich, merchant or cheat, and mine eyes have seen it squandered on vile fellows without number, and naught of that which I feel towards this man ever entered my mind. Assuredly it cannot be that he is a man of no consequence, who is the occasion of this access of avarice in me. Though he seem to me a vile fellow, he must be some great man, that my mind is thus obstinately averse to do him honor. Of which musings the upshot was that he sent to inquire who the vile fellow was, and learning that he was Pramaso, come to see if what he had heard of his magnificent state were true, he was stricken with shame, having heard of old Pramaso's fame, and knowing him to be a great man. Wherefore, being zealous to make him the amend, he studied to do him honor in many ways, and after breakfast, that his garb might accord with his native dignity, he caused him to be nobly arrayed, and setting him upon a palfrey and filling his purse, left it to his own choice, whether to go or to stay. So Pramaso, with a full heart, thanked him for his courtesy in terms the amplest that he could command, and, having left Paris afoot, returned thither on horseback. Messer Cain was shrewd enough to apprehend Bergamina's meaning perfectly well without a gloss, and said with a smile, Bergamino, thy parable is apt, and declares to me very plainly thy losses, my avarice, and what thou desirest of me. And in good sooth this access of avarice, of which thou art the occasion, is the first that I have experienced. But I will expel the intruder with the baton which thou thyself hast furnished. So he paid Bergamino's reckoning, habited him nobly in one of his own robes, gave him money and a palfrey, and left it for the time at his discretion, whether to go or to stay. Novel 8. Guglielmo Borsier by a neat retort sharply ensures avarice in Messer Ermino de Grimaldi. Next Facostrata was seated Loretta, who, when the praises bestowed on Bergamino's address had ceased, knowing that it was now her turn to speak, waited not for the word of command, but with a charming graciousness thus began, the last novel, dear gossips, prompts me to relate how a worthy man, likewise a jester, reprehended not without success the greed of a very wealthy merchant, and, though the burden of my story is not unlike the last, yet, perchance, it may not on that account be the less appreciated by you, because it has a happy termination. Know then that in Genoa there dwelt long ago a gentleman, who was known as Messer Ermino de Grimaldi, and whose wealth, both in lands and money, was generally supposed to be far in excess of that of any other burgher then in Italy, and as in wealth he was without a rival in Italy, so in meanness and avarice there was not any in the entire world, however richly endowed with those qualities, whom he did not immeasurably surpass, insomuch that, not only did he keep a tight grip upon his purse when honor was to be done to another, but in his personal expenditure, even upon things meet and proper, contrary to the general custom of the Genos, whose wont is to array themselves nobly, he was extremely penurious, as also in his outlay upon his table. Wherefore, not without just cause, folk had dropped his surname de Grimaldi, and called him instead Messer Ermino Pavarizia. While thus by thrift his wealth waxed greater and greater, it so chanced that there came to Genoa a jester of good parts, a man debonair and ready of speech, his name Guglielmo Borsier, whose like is not to be found today when jesters, to the great reproach be it spoken of those that claim the name and reputation of gentlemen, or rather to be called asses, being without courtly breeding, and formed after the coarse pattern of the basest of hurls. And whereas in the days of which I speak they made it their business, they spared no pains, to compose quarrels, to allay heart-burnings, between gentlemen, or arrange marriages, or leagues of amity, ministering meanwhile relief to jaded minds and solace to courts by the sprightly sallies of their wit, and with keen sarcasm, like fathers, entering churlish manners, being also satisfied with very trifling guerdons. Nowadays all their care is to spend their time in sandal mongering, in sowing discord, in saying, and what is worse in doing in the presence of company things churlish and flagitious, in bringing accusations, true or false, of wicked, shameful or flagitious conduct against one another, and in drawing gentlemen into base and nefarious practices by sinister and insidious arts. And by these wretched and depraved lords he is held most dear and best rewarded, whose words and deeds are the most atrocious, to the great reproach and scandal of the world of today, whereby it is abundantly manifest that virtue has departed from the earth, leaving a degenerate generation to wallow in the lowest depths of vice. But reverting to the point at which I started, wherefrom under stress of just indignation I have deviated somewhat further than I intended, I say that the said Guglielmo was had in honor, and was well received by all the gentlemen of Genoa, and tarrying some days in the city, heard much of the meanness and avarice of Messer Ermino, and was curious to see him. Now Messer Ermino had heard that this Guglielmo Borsier was a man of good parts, and, notwithstanding his avarice, having in him some sparks of good breeding, received him with words of hearty greeting and a gladsome mien, and conversed freely with him and of divers matters, and so conversing, took him with other Genos that were of his company to a new and very beautiful house which he had built, and after shewing him over the whole of it, said to him, Now, Messer Guglielmo, you have seen and heard many things. Could you suggest to me something, the like of which has not hitherto been seen, which I might have painted here in the saloon of this house? To which ill-judged question Guglielmo replied, Sir, it would not, I think, be in my power to suggest anything the like of which has never been seen, unless it were a sneeze or something similar. But if it so please you, I have something to suggest, which, I think, you have never seen. Prithee, what may that be? Said Messer Ermino, not expecting to get the answer which he got. For Guglielmo replied forthwith, Paint courtesy here, which Messer Ermino had no sooner heard, than he was so stricken with shame that his disposition underwent a complete change, and he said, Messer Guglielmo, I will see to it that courtesy is here painted in such wise that neither you nor anyone else shall ever again have reason to tell me that I have not seen or known that virtue. And henceforward so enduring was the change wrought by Guglielmo's words, there was not in Genoa, while he lived, any gentleman so liberal and so gracious and so lavish of honor both to strangers and to his fellow citizens as Messer Ermino de Grimaldi. Novel 9. The censure of a Gascon lady converts the king of Cyprus from a churlish to an honorable temper. Except Elisa, none now remained to answer the call of the queen, and she, without waiting for it, with gladsome alacrity thus began, Bethink you, damsels, how often it has happened that men who have been obdurate to ventures and chastisements have been reclaimed by some unpremeditated casual word. This is plainly manifest by the story told by Loretta and by mine, which will be of the briefest. I mean further to illustrate it, seeing that, good stories, being always pleasurable, or worth listening to with attention, no matter by whom they may be told. 'Twas, then, in the time of the first king of Cyprus, after the conquest made of the Holy Land by Godfrey de Bouillon, that a lady of Gascony made a pilgrimage to the Holy Sepulchre, and on her way home, having landed at Cyprus, met with brutal outrage at the hands of certain ruffians. Broken-hearted and disconsolate, she determined to make her complaint to the king, but she was told that it would be all in vain, because so spiritless and fainéant was he that he not only neglected to avenge affronts put upon others, but endured with a reprehensible tameness those which were offered to himself, insomuch that whoso had any ill humor to vent, took occasion to vex or mortify him. The lady, hearing this report, despaired of redress, and by way of alleviation of her grief determined to make the king sensible of his baseness. So in tears she presented herself before him and said, Sire, it is not to seek redress of the wrong done me that I come here before you, but only that, so please you, I may learn of you how it is that you suffer patiently the wrongs which, as I understand, were done you, that thus schooled by you in patience I may endure my own, which, God knows, I would gladly, were it possible, transfer to you, seeing that you are so well fitted to bear them. These words aroused the hitherto sluggish and apathetic king as it were from sleep. He redressed the lady's wrong, and having thus made a beginning, thenceforth meted out the most rigorous justice to all that in any wise offended against the majesty of his crown. Novel 10. Master Alberto da Bologna honorably puts to shame a lady who sought occasion to put him to shame in that he was in love with her. After Elisa had done, it only remained for the queen to conclude the day's storytelling, and thus with manner debonair did she begin. As stars in the serene expanse of heaven, as in springtime flowers in the green pastures, so, honorable damsels, in the hour of rare and excellent converse is wit with its bright sallies, which, being brief, or much more proper for ladies than for men, seeing that prolixity of speech, when brevity is possible, is much less allowable to them, albeit shame be to us all and all our generation. Few ladies are none or left today who understand aught that is wittily said, or understanding or able to answer it. For the place of those graces of the spirit which distinguished the ladies of the past has now been usurped by adornments of the person, and she whose dress is most richly and variously and curiously dight, accounts herself more worthy to be had in honor, forgetting, that, were one but so to array him, an ass would carry a far greater load of finery than any of them, and for all that be not a whit the more deserving of honor. I blush to say this, for in answering others I condemn myself. Tricked out, bedecked, bedizened thus, we are either silent and impassive as statues, or, if we answer aught that is said to us, much better were it we had held our peace. And we make believe, forsooth, that our failure to acquit ourselves in converse with our equals of either sex does but proceed from guilelessness, dignifying stupidity by the name of modesty, as if no lady could be modest and converse with other folk than her maid or laundress or bakehouse woman, which if nature had intended, as we feign she did, she would have set other limits to our garrulousness. True it is that in this, as in other matters, time and place and person are to be regarded, because it sometimes happens that a lady or gentleman, thinking by some sally of wit to put another to shame, has rather been put to shame by that other, having failed duly to estimate their relative powers. Wherefore, that you may be on your guard against such error, and, further, that in you be not exemplified the common proverb, to wit, that women do ever and on all occasions choose the worst, I trust that this last of today's stories, which falls to me to tell, may serve you as a lesson that, as you are distinguished from others by nobility of nature, so you may also she yourself separate from them by excellence of manners. There lived not many years ago, perhaps yet lives, in Bologna, a very great physician, so great that the fame of his skill was noised abroad throughout almost the entire world. Now Master Alberto, such was his name, was of so noble a temper that, being now nigh upon 70 years of age, and all but devoid of natural heat of body, he was yet receptive of the flames of love, and having at an assembly seen a very beautiful widow lady, Madonna Melhorita di Ghisilieri, as some say, and being charmed with her beyond measure, was, notwithstanding his age, no less ardently enamored than a young man, insomuch that he was not well able to sleep at night, unless during the day he had seen the fair lady's lovely and delicate features. Wherefore he began to frequent the vicinity of her house, passing to and fro in front of it, now on foot, now on horseback, as occasion best served, which she and many other ladies perceiving, made merry together more than once, to see a man of his years and discretion and love, as if they deemed that this most delightful passion of love were only fit for empty-headed youths, and could not in men be either harbored or engendered. Master Alberto thus continuing to haunt the front of the house, it so happened that one feast day the lady with other ladies was seated before her door, and Master Alberto's approach being thus observed by them for some time before he arrived, they comploted to receive him and shew him honor, and then to rally him on his love, and so they did, rising with one accord to receive him, bidding him welcome, and ushering him into a cool courtyard, where they regaled him with the finest wines and comfits, which done, in a tone of refined and sprightly banter they asked him how it came about that he was enamored of this fair lady, seeing that she was beloved of many a fine gentleman of youth and spirit. Master Alberto, being thus courteously assailed, put a blithe face on it, and answered, "Madam, my love for you need surprise none that is conversant with such matters, and least of all you that are worthy of it. And though old men, of course, have lost the strength which love demands for its full fruition, yet are they not therefore without the good intent and just appreciation of what beseems the accepted lover, but indeed understand it far better than young men, by reason that they have more experience. My hope in thus old aspiring to love you, who are loved by so many young men, is founded on what I have frequently observed of ladies' ways at lunch, when they trifle with the lupin and the leek. In the leek no part is good, but the head is at any rate not so bad as the rest, and indeed not unpalatable. You, however, for the most part, following a depraved taste, hold it in your hand and munch the leaves, which are not only of no account but actually distasteful. How am I to know, madam, that in your selection of lovers, you are not equally eccentric? In which case I should be the man of your choice, and the rest would be cast aside. Whereto the gentle lady, somewhat shame-stricken, as were also her fair friends, thus made answer, Master Alberto, our presumption has received from you a most just and no less courteous reproof, but your love is dear to me, as should ever be that of a wise and worthy man. And therefore, saving my honor, I am yours, entirely and devotedly at your pleasure and command. This speech brought Master Alberto to his feet, and the others also rising, he thanked the lady for her courtesy, bade her a gay and smiling adieu, and so left the house. Thus the lady, not considering on whom she exercised her wit, thinking to conquer was conquered herself, against which mishap you, if you are discreet, will ever be most strictly on your guard. As the young ladies and the three young men finished their storytelling, the sun was westering, and the heat of the day in great measure abated, which their queen observing debonairly, thus she spoke, Now, dear gossips, my day of sovereignty draws to a close, and naught remains for me to do but to give you a new queen, by whom on the morrow our common life may be ordered as she may deem best in a course of seemly pleasure. And though there seems to be still some interval between day and night, yet, as whoso does not in some degree anticipate the course of time, cannot well provide for the future, and in order that what the new queen shall decide to be meet for the morrow may be made ready beforehand, I decree that from this time forth the days begin at this hour. And so in reverent submission to him in whom is the life of all beings, for our comfort and solace we commit the governance of our realm for the morrow into the hands of Queen Philomena, most discreet of damsels. So saying she arose, took the laurel wreath from her brow, and with a gesture of reverence set it on the brow of Philomena, whom she then, and after her all the other ladies and the young men, saluted as queen, doing her due and graceful homage. Queen Philomena modestly blushed a little to find herself thus invested with the sovereignty, but, being put on her mettle by Pampinia's recent admonitions, she was minded not to seem awkward, and soon recovered her composure. She then began by confirming all the appointments made by Pampinia, and making all needful arrangements for the following morning and evening, which they were to pass where they then were. Whereupon she thus spoke, Dearest gossips, though, thanks rather to Pampinia's courtesy than to merit of mine, I am made queen of you all, yet I am not on that account minded to have respect merely to my own judgment in the governance of our life, but to unite your wisdom with mine, and that you may understand what I think of doing, and by consequence may be able to amplify or curtail it at your pleasure. I will in few words make known to you my purpose. The course observed by Pampinia today, if I have judged aright, seems to be alike commendable and delectable, wherefore, until by lapse of time, or for some other cause, it grow tedious, I purpose not to alter it. So when we have arranged for what we have already taken in hand, we will go hence and enjoy a short walk. At sundown we will sup in the cool, and we will then sing a few songs and otherwise divert ourselves, until it is time to go to sleep. Tomorrow we will rise in the cool of the morning, and after enjoying another walk, each at his or her sweet will, we will return, as today, and in due time break our fast, dance, sleep, and having risen, will here resume our storytelling, wherein, methinks, pleasure and profit unite in superabundant measure. True it is that Pampinia, by reason of her late election to the sovereignty, neglected one matter, which I mean to introduce, to wit, the circumscription of the topic of our storytelling, and its pre-assignment, that each may be able to premeditate some apt story bearing upon the theme. And seeing that from the beginning of the world fortune has made men the sport of divers accidents, and so it will continue until the end, the theme, so please you, shall in each case be the same, to wit, the fortune of such as after divers adventures have at last attained a goal of unexpected felicity. The ladies and the young men alike commended the rule thus laid down, and agreed to follow it. Deonio, however, when the rest had done speaking, said, Madam, as all the rest have said, so say I, briefly, that the rule prescribed by you is commendable and delectable, but of your especial grace I crave a favor, which, I trust, may be granted and continue to me, so long as our company shall endure, which favor is this, that I be not bound by the assigned theme if I am not so minded, but that I have leave to choose such topic as best shall please me. And lest any suppose that I crave this grace as one that has not stories ready to hand, I am henceforth content that mine be always the last. The Queen, knowing him to be a merry and facetious fellow, and feeling sure that he only craved this favor in order that, if the company were jaded, he might have an opportunity to recreate them by some amusing story, gladly, with the consent of the rest, granted his petition. She then rose, and attended by the rest sauntered towards a stream, which, issuing clear as crystal from a neighboring hill, precipitated itself into a valley shaded by trees close set amid living rock and fresh green herbage. Barefoot and armed they entered the stream, and roving hither and thither amused themselves in divers ways till in due time they returned to the palace, and gaily supped. Supper ended, the Queen sent for instruments of music, and bade Loretta lead a dance, while Amelia was to sing a song accompanied by Dihonil on the lute. Accordingly Loretta lead a dance, while Amelia with passion sang the following song: So fain I am of my own loveliness, I hope, nor think not ere the weight to feel of other amorousness. When in the mirror I my face behold, that see I there which doth my mind content, nor any present hap or memory old may me deprive of such sweet ravishment. Where else, then, should I find such blandishment of sight and sense that ere my heart should know another amorousness? Nor need I fear lest the fair thing retreat, when fain I am my solace to renew rather, I know, 'twill me advance to meet, to pleasure me, and choose so sweet a view that speech or thought of none its semblance true paint or conceive may err, unless he burn with even such amorousness. Thereon as more intent I gaze, the fire waxeth within me hourly, more and more, myself I yield thereto, myself entire, and foretaste have of what it hath in store, and hope of greater joyance than before, nay, such as ne'er none knew, for ne'er was felt such amorousness. This ballade, to which all heartily responded, albeit its words furnished much matter of thought to some, was followed by some other dances, and part of the brief night being thus spent, the Queen proclaimed the first day ended, and bade light the torches that all might go to rest until the following morning, and so, seeking their several chambers, to rest they went. And doth here the first day of the Demeron beginneth the second, in which, under the rule of Philomena, they discourse of the fortunes of such as after divers misadventures have at last attained a goal of unexpected felicity. The sun was already trailing the new day in his wake of light, and the birds, blithely chanting their lays among the green boughs, carried the tidings to the ear, when with one accord all the ladies and the 3 young men arose, and entered the gardens, where for no little time they found their delight in sauntering about the dewy meads, straying hither and thither, culling flowers, and weaving them into fair garlands. The day passed like its predecessor. They breakfasted in the shade, and danced and slept until noon, when they rose, and, at their Queen's behest, assembled in the cool meadow, and sat them down in a circle about her. Fair and very debonair she shewed, crowned with her laurel wreath, as for a brief space she scanned the company, and then bade Naphile shew others the way with a story. Naphile made no excuse and gaily thus began.